I read 13 more fantasy or sci-fi books, and it's time to do what we love to do on this channel, rank them from worst to best. I know some of you will be surprised that I've already read 13 more books, but I'll just be absolutely honest, I don't have a 9-to-5 job, I don't have kids, some of these are audiobooks, and some of these are novellas, so that's the reason why I've been able to read so much recently, but I'm starting a new job soon, so I'm expecting the number of books that I'm able to read in a short time is definitely going to decrease soon. Alright, but what is the worst book I read in recent months? Well, it is without a doubt Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. Now, I made a full spoiler-free vlog, but overall, I think that romantasy is just not a genre for me, but if you like romantasy, if you like fast-paced adventures, and if you like horny dragons, then check out this one. Alright, but let's move away from romantasy to epic high fantasy, and the second worst book I read in recent times, and again, I feel quite bad of calling this the second worst, because actually most of the books on this list are books that I really enjoyed, but that is A Sword of Bronze and Ashes by Anna Smith Spark. Now, Anna Smith Spark is called by many the queen of grimdark fantasy, and I know that a lot of people have very different opinions about her writing. She has written another trilogy called Empires of Dust, I think, which is a trilogy that people either love or hate, and when I heard about this novel, I mean, I saw Adrian Tchaikovsky rave about it, I saw Shauna Lawless rave about it, and it's described as a folk horror lyrical high fantasy, and it's a standalone. I was just like, I need to check out this novel because this sounds so unique and refreshing. And overall, my experience was very mixed. Actually, for the first 20%, I was this close to DNFing it, but then I started to get a bit more into the writing style, and I started enjoying some aspects of it. But overall, I just was very confused about a lot of the things that happened in this novel. I saw that Shauna Lawless described the writing in this book as a stream of consciousness kind of writing style, and I think that kind of makes sense of describing it that way, because you're often confused if a person is talking or if a person is thinking, if it's in the past or if it's in the present. It just kind of all just blends together, and it creates a very unique reading experience. And I must also say that this has a very interesting take on the Chosen One trope, where we basically meet the Chosen One, or the big epic warrior, many years after she was in this grand position. She's now birthed many children, and she isn't in the same shape as she used to be. So I did find that really interesting. But in a lot of ways, this novel felt more like an abstract painting, which is almost like, art and so on, where some people will really appreciate it and some people will not, and some people will just not understand it. And in a lot of ways, I felt like I was looking at an abstract painting and I just didn't understand it. So I'm not sure if this is a book that just simply didn't work for me, or if this is actually badly written, or if it's actually a masterpiece and I just didn't understand it. I don't know, but overall I didn't really enjoy it, and I think this will probably be a book that I'll just forget I've read. Now, before we continue our ranking, I need to introduce a book. Now, you guys know I love self-published books, which is the reason why I'm so excited to be introducing Orban. Now, Orban is the first book in the Homonia Chronicle series, which is written by no other than Scott Adrian, who is today's sponsor. Now, this exciting new book is releasing on the 25th of August, so it is already out, and it dives into the questions: what is stronger, science or magic? Now, this book follows Dr. Graham Milford, a 32-year-old technologist who invents a personal wormhole. Now, his success turns into a nightmare as he's forced to run for his life along with 3 other colleagues as his CEO turns mad, and with nowhere else to go, they flee to Orban, another universe full of elves, fairies, pixies, robots, and more. And now Graham is on a seemingly impossible mission, which is to try and get home and defeat his CEO. Now, Orban uses humorous dialogue, energetic fight scenes, and logic to make sense of a world very unlike our own. Now, as I mentioned, this book is already out, and I will leave a link in the description down below if you want to read it. Thank you so much to Scott Adrian for sponsoring this video. Now, let's get back to the ranking. Okay, but on the 11th spot, we have the conclusion to the Taisha trilogy, The Bone Ship's Wakes. Now, let me just make it clear that this isn't a bad book by any means. I gave it 3.5 stars, but I did have a couple of issues with this novel. Let me just say firstly, the Taisha trilogy is a fantastic trilogy overall. I had a wonderful time reading this one, and I posted a full spoiler-free deep dive into this trilogy's world building and so on, so if you're interested in that one, then definitely check out that video, because I think that this is one of the most unique and intricate trilogies I read in a long while. But my main 2 issues with this novel is that one of my favorite characters, or is actually my favorite character, she is gone for the most of this book, which it makes sense in the story, but when this character finally reappears, it just felt different. So felt that was quite unfortunate that this character was missing for so much time. And then secondly, the way RJ Barker wraps up this trilogy, let me just say, is controversial. Now, some people will think it's brilliant, but RJ Barker basically introduces a new world building element at the very end, which has huge repercussions for the whole world and for the story. And in a lot of ways, this kind of felt like a cop-out in my opinion, or like Deus Ex Machina, where the author has written himself into a corner, he doesn't know how to wrap up the conclusion, and then he just introduces a new element to actually make it make sense. And for me, I felt that was quite unfortunate. But overall, this is a relatively solid conclusion, and a lot of aspect of this book is really great. It's just like the last act I've just felt was very rushed. Alright, and next up we have A Dagger in the Dark by Tom Dumbrell. Now, I was so excited when I heard that this was going to come out, because Tom Dumbrell, he has written a trilogy called Pillars of Peace, and when he wrote the third book, he basically said, I'm going to retire from writing because it was just so time consuming. He's also about to become a father and so on, so I didn't really blame him, but I felt it was very unfortunate because the third book was his best writing to date, and it just felt like there was so much more potential for Tom Dumbrell to write even more because he was becoming even better at writing. So I was so happy when he said that this was gonna come out, and I read this in less than like an hour, I think. It's only 80 pages and there isn't that much text on each page. And overall, this was a fun, fast-paced novella, and in typical Tom Dumbrell fashion, it has some really interesting and quite satisfying plot twists. But in my opinion, book 3 is still Tom Dumbrell's best writing to date, and while one of my favorite characters from the original trilogy does show up here, which was quite a nice touch, this isn't anything revolutionary or mind-blowing when it comes to the fantasy genre. It's just a great time, and actually, you can start with this one if you want to get into Tom Dumbrell's writing, or just want to give this world a go, but in my opinion, I think The Look of a King is still a better starting point. Alright, and next up we have Mordekax by Mark McCratcher. I have no idea how to pronounce that last name. Let me just make it clear. Mark is a patron of mine, but that is really not why I read this book, because he gifted me this book 6 or 8 months ago, and I initially didn't have any plans to read this one, but Mark entered this book into the SBFBO competition, and he's been receiving actually quite a lot of relatively positive reviews, so I was definitely intrigued. And then I was looking for a relatively short read recently, and I decided to pick up this book because it's less than 300 pages, and again, there isn't that much text in each page, and I'm really glad I did. This book is basically set in a medieval English village, and we're set in this village where a lot of people are dying of this virus or this plague, and then suddenly a character shows up and he has the cure for this plague, and obviously everyone is absolutely amazed by this random stranger that just comes to the village and heals everyone. But our protagonist, before this happens, has been warned that someone will show up at the village, and do not trust this person because this person has other motives. There's a lot of intrigue, there's a mystery element to this novel, the atmosphere is great, and obviously Neil Gaiman is a way better writer. But if you enjoy The Ocean at the End of the Lane or those kind of mystery fantasy novels, then definitely check out this one. It's relatively short, and I had an overall really great time with this one. I gave this one 4 stars. Alright, and next up we have Rise of the Ranger by Philip C. Quaintrell. Now, I heard about this novel firstly from Patrick Leo, and basically, if you enjoy John Gwynne or Ryan Cahill, then definitely check out this series. Now, this is the first book in I think it's 9-book series, so it's an absolutely massive epic fantasy series. But Rise of the Ranger was a really solid introduction to this epic world. It has elves, it feels classic, but it also feels modern. The pacing is absolutely ruthless, and the stakes are high. I mean, I absolutely can't wait to continue the series because, as I said, it feels like a The Bound and the Broken kind of series, which is usually right up my alley. Now, my only real criticism here is that Philip C. Quaintrell, he maybe went a bit overboard with all the POVs. I think there's 8 POVs in the first book, which is quite crazy, but if you read this book quite quickly, then you'll definitely be able to keep hold of who's who, or you can write it down. But I've also heard that in the later books, he actually starts to limit the amount of POVs because he probably even acknowledged that there's too many POVs to follow and so on. But this is a very solid first book in a huge series, and I absolutely can't wait to continue, and I gave this one 4 stars. Next up we have a book that is coming out next month, and it's another novella, which is The Ice by Ryan Kyle. Now, you kind of have to have read all the other books to be able to read this one, but I'll just say it now. I think that I am actually enjoying the novellas in this huge series more than the epic fantasy tomes. It is just fascinating how much ground Ryan Cahill is able to cover in 100 pages or so. It is absolutely mind-blowing. Literally, he is able to tell an epic fantasy stories that sometimes spans over years of times, that has huge stakes and repercussions for the world, and make it fast-paced and engaging. And what I usually enjoy so much about these novellas is also that they're much more character focused on one character, and I just find that the novellas are so good, and for the eyes, it is a very solid entry. I read it again in one sitting because it was just so addictive, and it gives us insights into what happened a couple of years before Of Blood and Fire, which is the first book in the series, and it definitely adds some interesting context to the overall conflict. So yeah, if you're a fan of Frank Kyle, if you're a fan of the Bound and Broken series, definitely check out The Eyes. It is a fantastic novella, and I gave it 4.5 stars. Alright, the next two books, and I'll just group them together. I finished the Red Rising trilogy, and I need to make a full video talking about my experience here, so I'll keep it brief and relatively spoiler free. But overall, I thought that Morning Star was my second favorite in this trilogy, and Golden Sun was my favorite book in this trilogy. Overall, I had a great time with this one. It's very it's so fast paced, the stakes are crazy, and I think that one of the reasons why people love it so much is because the plot twists are very satisfying. Now in some ways this almost feels like The Faithful and The Fallen, but just sci-fi, because the pacing is so ruthless, and I think that is probably one of the reasons why people love it so much, because it's quite addictive and you kind of need to figure out what happens next, because like Pierce Brown, he has an ability to just keep the plot rolling forward. Now is this a new favorite series of mine? Probably not. I mean, I'm really glad I read it, and I'm definitely going to be continuing with the Iron Age or whatever the next books are called, but I think that this trilogy might have been just slightly overhyped for me. Now again, I really enjoyed this. I gave Golden Sun I think 4 or 4.5 stars, and Morning Star was like a 4 or 3.5 star read. So overall I did enjoy them, but unfortunately I expected to give this one 5 stars, and I also expected to give this one 5 stars, which just didn't happen. But I think that if you enjoy sci-fi, or if you want to like read some more character driven sci-fi that is fast paced, the Red Rising is a perfect recommendation. Albeit I sound a bit disappointed, which I'm not. I'm really excited to continue this series. But yeah, I need to make a full video talking about the series, because I mean there's so much to say about this trilogy. Okay, the next 4 books are basically, I mean, they're almost impossible to rank because I loved all of them so much. But the next book is Recursion by Blake Crouch. I mean, this was such a good time. I read this book in 2 or 3 days, I believe, and in typical Blake Crouch manner, this was just overly addictive. The pacing is absolutely ruthless, and he just knows how to take these very difficult concepts and make them engaging, make them easy to understand, and then that mixed with having great characters is just overly addictive. I mean, if you have read anything about Blake Crouch, then you just know that if you read like 10 or 20 pages of this book, for example, then you just won't be able to stop, because you just need to figure out what actually happens. And what I also find interesting with Blake Crouch is that he has an ability to write really satisfying conclusions, and that is definitely also the case with this one. So yeah, if you want to read a relatively short sci-fi novel that is overly addictive, I mean, Blake Crouch, he's my new bae, then check out Recursion. It's a standalone, you can definitely start with this one. I gave this one 4.5 stars, I believe. And yes, there is another Blake Crouch book on this list. Alright, and my third favorite book in recent times is The Wheel Throne by Ken Liu, and look at this sloth. How cute is that? So this is the third book in the Dandelion Dynasty. This is an absolutely chunky book. It's more than 1,000 pages, I believe, and this book, the climax, the epic final scene in this third book is a cooking battle. I'm not even joking, it is a cooking battle. How unique and crazy is that? But let me just say now, the Dandelion Dynasty, one of my favorite series now, because the world building, the writing style, the character arcs, the scope, it is unrivaled, and also the overall setting is so refreshing. But The Wheel Throne is probably, no, I'll say it's my least favorite in the series so far. I still have one more book to go, but that is not to say that this wasn't a good book. It's just The Grace of Kings and The Wall of Storms they are incredible. I think I gave this one 4.5 stars. And I think a big reason why this probably isn't a new favorite of mine is because I think originally he wrote The Wheel Throne book 3 and Speaking Bones, which is book 4, as one book. So this is only really part 1 of the conclusion. So you're basically supposed to read book 3 and 4 together, and I've only read the first half of the conclusion, so it's not a huge surprise that this wasn't my favorite book in this trilogy. But this was just, again, so good. But yeah, it's the third book in the series, so I'm not gonna say much, but please guys, more of you need to read the Dandelion Dynasty. It is literally mind-blowing how refreshing it feels compared to most other fantasy works I've ever read. Now, I was a bit negative about the conclusion of the Tideshell trilogy, but my second favorite book I read in recent times is Call of the Bone Ships by R.J. Barker, book 2 in the Tideshell trilogy. Now, this is the best book in the series, and I just felt like the Bone Ships, the first book, is a good book, but this one literally improves upon everything. The stakes are higher, the pacing is better, the amount of great character moments, there's so many of them, and the world building is fleshed out even more, and I just had such a great time with this novel. I enjoyed almost every single chapter, so I think that the Bone Ships is quite a tough sell, and this book still has that steep learning curve, that difficult writing style to get into. But if you're able to read the Bone Ships and you think that it's a relatively good book, then I think the Call of the Bone Ships is going to be an absolute favorite of yours. And I know we often talk about trilogies having the middle book syndrome, but in my opinion, book 2 in this trilogy is actually the best book in the trilogy, which is very, very rare. So yeah, I definitely need to read some of R.J. Barker's other works now. Okay, but my favorite book I read in recent times, and this will definitely be in my top 10 reads of the year, possibly in the top 5 or maybe even top 3, because this was, it's so good. And I did mention Blake Crouch, didn't I? Dark Matter by Blake Crouch. Now, I might have enjoyed this more just because I read it before Recursion, but Recursion again is an absolutely phenomenal read. But yeah, Blake Crouch, he's my new obsession. I need to read everything else he's written now, so please give me recommendations if you have any. I do own Upgrade. You can't see it, but it's behind here. Here we go. And I heard that this one isn't as good as Recursion or Dark Matter. But man, similar to Recursion, this just is overly addictive. It has phenomenal characters. It really pulls at your heartstrings, and at the heart of this novel you have this so interesting sci-fi concept. But again, the characters are the primary focus of this novel, and they experience this sci-fi concept, which I don't really go into spoilers. But guys, please read Dark Matter. It is relatively short. It is overly addictive. This is a perfect 5 out of 5 read. I read this book in one day because I read 10 pages and I was just I'm not gonna be able to stop reading now, and I read it in less than 24 hours because it is incredible. It is overly addictive, and who knew that sci-fi thrillers were something that I needed in my life? I didn't know that, but yeah. Absolute phenomenal work, Blake Crouch. This is definitely a novel you should read if you're looking for a palate cleanser. It's a perfect 5 out of 5 stars for me. But yep, here you have some of the books I read recently ranked from worst to best. And as I said, my least favorite book I read recently is Fourth Wing, and my favorite is without a doubt Dark Matter. But fortunately, I have read very few bad books recently, so I'm really happy about that one. Also, I need to show you my t-shirt. TBR list longer than my life expectancy. How fun is that? Alright, thank you so much for watching. Hey guys, thank you so much for watching this video all the way to the end. I hope you enjoyed this video and got some inspiration to read more books. Now, if you want to support me in any way, then you can check out my Patreon. I have different tiers and you'll get different benefits depending on what tier you support. Some of the benefits include getting your name in my videos, voting rights on my next feed, getting a special role on my Discord server, getting access to one Patreon exclusive video a month, or even art cards and bookmarks signed by my wife and me. Most of the money goes to hiring an editor to do a couple of videos for me a month, which basically allows me to post high quality content more frequently. But yeah, thank you so much for watching and God bless.